Hello and welcome back to the Common Sense Show.tv. I'm Dave Hodges. You know that. I'm your host. And we have the Doug and Dave Intel Report TV style. We do this TV, radio, the topics change. Last night we did the truckers and all that's over on radio. You want to check that. It's up on our archives. I think Steve Quayle's carrying it. So it's pretty cool. But this is a totally different topic. And just by way of introduction, I'm a Christian, so I lean heavily on Genesis 6. I'll explain that in the course of this. Doug's a Christian. I'm not sure where he comes down on this topic, but it's so wide open. I'm never feeling I'm in a position where I can criticize. But my dad, for a long time, he worked at Martin Marietta, which is today Martin Lockheed. Lockheed Martin, I should say. They had captured German scientists that he'd worked with, and they were working on the physics of advanced craft. And he was very compartmentalized in the beginning, but then as the project grew, he grew in supervisory capabilities. So he would know what the other compartments were doing. He didn't know the whole picture, but he was able to piece a lot of it together. And I'll just start off by telling this quick story before I bring Doug in. I asked my dad once about UFOs. I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, you know, it's funny. All the Germans said that they were alien." And I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, I asked him, every one of them, one-on-one, did you ever meet an alien? Have any contact with them, electronic, in person, whatever?" And they, to a person, said, "No, but our commanders did." And my dad said, "Look, we know about the Nazi occultic practices. Hitler invaded Germany on the advice of an astrologer." And he said, "I think they were into the occult. And I think these were spirit beings, maybe masquerading as aliens." This really fits into Genesis 6 to some degree too. But that's what he thought. The 2 years he gave his disclosure to me before he passed, and this is why he was telling me, he said, "Hey, you can't say anything, son, till your mom passes too." And that was in 2011. So I had to hold on to this for 26 years. I had one private meeting with Jim Mars at the Phoenix airport. Bill Pollock, ex-Air Force Intel, did some CIA work, and Vance Davis, former NSA, and you've seen Vance on this show. They were my confidants. Those are the only people I talked to about this. Didn't even talk to my own family because I didn't want to get my mom stripped of my dad's pension and everything she owned. But in 2013, I came out on the Hagman show and talked about this. But I told Doug, I said, "Hey, look," I said, "I think we got to talk about UFOs. I don't pretend to have any final answers, but I know some things. I know Doug will know some things." So I thought we'd compare notes. Doug, sorry for the long intro, but welcome to the show. Glad you're here.
Hey man, I'm always glad to be here. You know, the Doug and Dave Intel Reports, a great collaboration between our experiences and our professional careers. And I think with shows like that involve ufology, that involve this whole niche of aliens and UFOs and the disclosure projects, I think it's a great way just to branch off of the boring politics. You can only scream "Let's go Brandon" or Brando if you're in Canada so much until people stop caring. So hey, you know what? UFOs. That sounds like a good one to me. Dave,
You
there's
know, you know what? One thing people aren't saying, they're not saying "Let's go Brandon" to Kamala, and they're not saying "Let's go Kamala" because they might get more than they bargained for. But anyway, go ahead, Doug. I had to get that in.
They're saying other things about Kamala that I don't think we're allowed to say.
No. Family show. We got to. I left my comment to the imagination of our viewers.
We'll save that for the locker room. There's a lot of different directions that we can go with UFOs. Obviously, before the show, me and Dave were talking about the Phoenix Lights. Now, there's a staggering amount of Americans. I remember looking at the statistic probably about 5 or 6 years ago of how many Americans who have had a experience of some sort of encounter with a UFO, be it seeing a unexplainable object in the sky or underwater, the USO. But what is strange is that when you go back in time in history and you look at, Dave, all the way from like the paintings from Michelangelo and Leonardo, some of the very, very uh, famous ancient painters. They had depictions of what we would call a spacecraft. If you look at the Indian culture, the ancient Indian culture, their gods had a spacecraft, a craft that they flew around in called the Vimanas. You also had this depiction in Native American folklore. You had it in Norwegian folklore, in the Viking folklore. You had it in almost every type of folklore that was out there. There had something to do with a entity from another dimension that would come through a portal, or a entity that would come from the sky, from the heavens, in some sort of a craft. You know, in the Bible, we learn about the wheels upon wheels. Uh, and I am no UFO specialist. I'm no ufologist. As you can see behind me, my career was holding these type of things. So I'm limited in scope, but I am broad when it comes to speculation, but also information. I've been around a lot of people who've known a lot of things, who've experienced some things that we can't always explain. I myself have, what I presume to say, think that I have seen UFOs, and I know the difference, Dave, between the International Space Station and between a satellite or a shooting star and something that zigzagged across the sky. Now, I wasn't drunk and I don't get high, so I know what I was looking at. But I think in total, I mean, maybe I've only seen that twice in my lifetime. Things I can't explain from the sky. But how many different reports are there?
Well, we're gonna pull up a screen here.
Airlines.
I kind of want to set the stage here, so bear with me while I line up my my prompts here, and we'll go to share screen, and I'll show the Phoenix lights, and I'll describe what I saw. Yes, I did see the Phoenix lights, folks. I was on Art Bell anonymously because the person giving me information from the Air Force could attract me because I was his, I think I was teaching sociology at his base. Here we go. Okay, you can see that right there, right? Doug?
Yep, we got it. Yep.
Okay, so let me explain something to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm out. It's about 9. I don't remember the exact time. It was in March. I believe it was 1993. No, 97. It was 97. That's right. And I'm out in the driveway shooting baskets, and we're living. This is not where we live now. We still have that residence, but we had a basketball court. And I was out shooting facing east. We were 3 miles from Interstate 17 in central Glendale, which is a suburb of Phoenix. And I'm shooting, and I'm looking up, and I'm seeing over the treetops this V-shaped craft, but it's flipping huge. Now, I didn't see it from this angle, but this comes the closest of the depictions that I've seen. If you would take this side here and invert it about 40 degrees and give it a little bit more of a V effect, that's what I saw. And it continued on a parallel path down I-17. I just stopped. In fact, the guy that I was shooting baskets with, he stopped. He goes, "What the hell? Are we being invaded by UFO?" That was his first comment. He thought these were aliens. And they're going down the path, I-17. Pretty soon they cross South Mountain, which was probably about 18, 20 miles southeast of me. The explanation in the media the Air Force gave was, oh, it was Illinois National Guard drills with flares behind South Mountain. If it was behind South Mountain, we wouldn't have seen it. And second of all, I saw it cross over South Mountain. So, don't lie to me. And we have video, lots of video of this stuff. But here it was right here, more of a V shape. And so the next day, one of my students calls me, and they had my number. I'm just that kind of professor, but they had my number. And he said, "Just curious, was out there in your neck of the woods. Did you see it?" I said, "Matter of fact, I did." And I said, "This is what I saw." He goes, "That's what we saw on radar." And I said, what is it? He goes, we were told not to look at it, lock onto it. And we scrambled nothing to look at it. So I know it was our stuff. And I said, Area 51. He goes, well, something like that's a good guess. Well, that went back to Bill Pollock and Vance Davis, who were friends with Art Bell. And Art had me on the show that night for 8 minutes under the condition I would not give out my name or where I taught, that I just to talk to someone in the military that gave me that information and about my eyewitness account, because I wasn't going to fry, my students. So this was my experience with the Phoenix Lights, so to speak. And Doug, should I bring up the other one here, the Nazi craft?
Yeah, if you want, I can fill in just a little bit of
Go ahead and take
data
that there. See, Doug thinks that this is late generation of this. Go ahead.
So, and I'm not going to discount or disprove. I'll tell you my theology here is, and it's this way. This is the way I think of a lot of things. Until you can disprove it to me, I'll just go ahead and believe it. That makes me sleep easier at night. So what we're looking at is a flying wing that was developed by the Horton brothers. Now, there's 3 Horton brothers, Walter, Reimar, I can't remember the other guy's name. But it's 3 brothers that flew for Nazi Germany and then became mathematicians and aircraft designers. And then they started to design the world's ever first, as you're seeing, jet-powered flying wing. Now, originally, this is made as a stealth bomber. It was part of what was called the America Bomber Project, and it was traditionally a steel tube with wooden wings, and it was meant to carry a 1,000-pound bomb 1,000 kilometers, and that was meant to go from Europe over to New York City to bomb New York City. There were many, many different aircraft, to include the first ever multiple stage rockets that Werner von Braun.
Let me ask you a question. How the hell would they get across the Atlantic without being detected and shot down?
Well, part of that was trying to fly as high as possible that other planes were not. The other part of that was a mass invasion. They had a staged mass invasion force, which also involved using U-boats. And they were also Nazi Germany was also the first ever to create a missile-based platform from a submarine, but it was more or less a cargo carrier, like a Connex box that was going to be tugged behind a U-boat that would then launch the Vengeance 2 rockets, or the A2 rockets. But with the Nazi flying wing, there were multiple different variations of this, and they were very, very large aircraft. They were a bombing aircraft. They weren't used for dogfighting. They were a stealth aircraft, a reconnaissance aircraft, but also a bombing aircraft. They didn't make too many of them that ever actually seen operations, but it wasn't long after the HO, I think it's 11, the HO 11, the Horton.
Do you mean that Kamala has a plane named after her? No, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Heels in the air, Harris. Yeah. Okay, so it was called the HO 11, and what was it known for?
That was the major concept for the America Bomber Project. They also had another one called the GO 229, was another version of the flying wing, and it wasn't until about maybe 6 years later that Lockheed Martin actually came out with their own version of the flying wing with a jet propulsion system. See, this was the first vehicle of its kind, this flying wing, that had a jet propulsion system that was actually successful in flight testing. So it was an incredible concept, which is where you would say we would get a lot of our stealth bombers now came from this original generation. What I see the transference of the design of the TR-3B craft, which is in ufology, when you see a triangle-shaped craft, okay, we're talking about something that has the nomenclature of the TR-3B. That's the Tango Robert 3B, the 3 Bravo. Now, it has the same variations and the same stealth capabilities as some of our own aircraft that we can't talk about, and you're probably not going to see pictures of, but they are in
I can
use.
talk about them. You can't.
Well, I can talk about to the extent of what they're used for. They are used in a certain way for reconnaissance and bombing operations. The problem is, okay, now the problem is when we talk about UFOs, there is a realm of physics that our aircraft have to abide by. But there is a whole nother separate realm of physics that these aircraft that the government organization ATIP have been tracking, and they don't abide by physics. And by that, I mean they have a stop and go technology, which does not exist. And they also have a propulsion system that is light years beyond anything that we do and can travel several hundred miles an hour to a complete stop to then take off at a couple thousand miles per hour. These are things that we don't have. They're hitting Mach
Doug.
levels that the human body cannot survive based off of what the public knows.
Okay,
Now, what the public knows and what Dave Hodges knows.
No, I know more than this, but go on. Go ahead, finish the thought. Finish the thought.
There are aircraft out there that we are constantly trying to revamp. Many of it comes from Nazi Germany, much of it, like the Flying Donut. That's another thing that came from Nazi Germany. The Canadians tried it. We tried it. It never really became that successful. It was a hovercraft. But it was very similar to what the ufologists will call the Nazi Bell. Now, you said something a while ago that has a lot to do with this, occultism. When you talk about the Nazis and you talk about their hierarchy, we're saying that they were in contact with another entity,
entities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They used seances.
Mm-hmm.
They used summoning spells, astrology. They used a lot of demonic style of worship and occultism to talk to these entities to then get the blueprints to create this craft. Take that in any direction you want.
I don't even know where to start. Okay, shall we start with what I've never revealed?
Yeah.
I've never said this, but when people who know me, they know my hobbies and what I like to read and what I like to talk about in my private time with smart scientists. The extra physics you're talking about, it's what my father and I talked about. And I got tutorial lessons. We did on paper diagrams, but he wouldn't let me keep them. He said, some people will kill for this. But he said, I want you to visually depict what this is. It's exactly what you described. But I'm going to give you a little history that my father told me about. And I've told the story generally, but I've never given the specifics. This goes back to Tesla. In 1899, New Year's Eve, he sent electrified current from Colorado Springs 70 miles north to the Capitol Hill area of Denver and turned the lights on a house. And he did it with wireless hyperdimensional physics. And he went to Westinghouse, and he was the jet set inventor of the day. And this was, I think post World War I. He and Westinghouse had this conversation. And he said, I can light up America for free. And this is when we were electrifying the country. In other words, the Tennessee Valley Authority will come, about 15 years later in the Depression, but they're doing these individual lightings of major cities like Chicago, New York, and so forth. And he says, I can do this for free, and we can put energy to remote areas of the country. And he looks at him and goes, you're a flippin' idiot. He said, I want to put a meter on this and make money. You're out of here. And it wasn't that just Westinghouse shunned him. Westinghouse got all the other industrialists to shun him too. So he had no choice. So in the 1920s, he goes to work for the Navy, where he was the one that developed first TV. He developed sonar and radar, and he was behind the Philadelphia experiment, which has never been told correctly. And I don't want to go into all the detail tonight, but it's never been told correctly. But that was Tesla. His work was so advanced in such a different physics, and I'll get to that in just a second, that when he died in his New York apartment in 1943, the FBI came and got all his stuff. Now, this is pretty commonly known, and it's never been released to date. Now, do the math. 57 plus 22, that was 79 years ago he died, and his material still can't be looked at. And I'll tell you why. We have three-dimensional physics that we teach our high school students. Just in the last 15, 20 years, because of people like Michio Kaku, have we started to teach what we call quantum physics, or some people like Richard Hoagland calls it hyperdimensional physics. This is the discussion I had with my father. I also had this discussion with the secretary of Warner von Braun, which I'm sure what she told me and what happened to her in the office, I'll come up later. But this is not unknown, but it's really kept under wraps. So when UFOs fly and they blink out and then they appear over here, or they do a 10,000 mile an hour stop on a dime and the occupants are dead, they still occupy the craft and moving it. This is the hyperdimensional physics. And they go into other dimensions and draw energy from the dimensions, and they can blink out into other dimensions where you can't see them. And then they decide to reappear back in this dimensional reality elsewhere. Now, who are these beings? I maintain they're the fallen angels, and that's my theory. Some people say they're aliens. I go, what the hell is the difference? They're not us, and they don't seem to be interested in helping us. This is what my father worked on, Doug, this extra dimensional physics. In fact, it's kind of funny. Fortunately, my wife knows I'm completely faithful and loyal and love her. We were at a function for her corporation that she was running. She was a manager of Arizona, in charge of all of Arizona. And we were at this thing, and this guy was there with his wife. And I'm standing in front of this plane. There was a display, and the lady next to me, his wife, said, "Oh man, that looks like it could jump into other dimensions." I looked at her and I said, "Who are you?" Because at this time, no one was talking about this stuff. We had a 45-minute conversation, and she wasn't unattractive. And both her husband and my wife are looking at each other, what the hell? But she told me, she says, "I can't tell you how I know this." She said, "But I can tell you these craft already exist. And we have flown to places you can't even imagine. Nice meeting you, Dave." So, Doug, this is something I know quite a bit about. The craft we're seeing is extra dimensional. It's on a different physics level. Michio Kaku has written books on superstring theory, where we go to 26 dimensions that he can prove mathematically. I've been told it's way more than that.
Well, you also have another person that became very famous off of Area 51. Actually, the guy who more or less told the world about Area 51, that was Bob Lazar.
Absolutely.
And Bob Lazar is a rocket scientist. He's the first man to put a rocket engine on a bicycle and tried to sell it. And Bob Lazar is one of those guys that, when you start to talk about Bob Lazar, you draw into the realm of very deep conspiracy. And I don't mean conspiracy theory. I mean conspiracy, as in the government conspired against this guy to hide him or to shun him, to shut him down. They've sent FBI raids on him before. And he was in fear for his life for so long that he would carry an Uzi with him. And Bob Lazar was made famous because he said that he worked on extraterrestrial aircraft, very compartmentalized, in a place called S4.
Yep.
And he claimed that they had found a new element. I can't remember what the name of the element was, but he attempts to harness this element himself and to recreate it. And he said that we have recreated a element that helps out with anti-gravity propulsion. And I mean, you start talking about this type of stuff, and you have people that are, higher ranking in the government that knows, and you have people that are higher ranking in the government that do not know. And we're talking about congressmen, senators, presidents, generals, and this is all because of compartmentalization. Now, within that realm of compartmentalization, there are black book, off the budget style funding for such aircraft like this, for such experiments like this. And, Roswell supposedly was part of that, even though, we claimed that, it could have potentially been the Russians who had it originally crashed an aircraft. And all this, once again, it comes down to a speculation of Operation Paperclip, which your dad knew a little bit about.
They didn't call it that. It's funny. That name gets attached. That was not what they called it.
What were they calling it then?
Well, they gave it different names depending on what the work was they were doing. When he was just working in a quad with 4 of the scientists at one time, and he had 2 assistants who were both theoretical physicists, they called it Operation Go Forward. That's what he called it. And then they had other names, and honestly, I put them on paper. They're by the way, they're not here. If you're going to come to my house and raid me, FBI, they're not here. I'd have to look at my notes to remember all the other ones. It wasn't a major part of the story, but Operation Paperclip was never mentioned. I went through this with Jim Mars when Bill Pollock flew the late Jim Mars, who was really a preeminent expert on this. They brought him in, and I didn't know I was being checked out. So this was like 1995, and I was friends with Bill and Vance Davis, NSA, for 2 years already. And Jim came in, and we were together for 6 hours in a restaurant and off site. And I told him about 75, 80% of what I knew. I held back some of the real sensitive stuff I still don't talk about today. And he went back to Bill and Pollock and Vance and said, Dave's the real deal. He knows exactly what I know and more. So then I started getting invited to these meetings that Bill would have at his home in Las Placitas, New Mexico, which is north of Albuquerque and in the mountains there. And we had people like Edgar Mitchell, Ken Arnold, both astronauts. Edgar walked on the moon in Apollo 17, and Richard Hoagland. And all these people were showing up, and we all signed non-disclosure agreements, and we would tell our story. I felt like I was the midget on the block compared to what these guys were talking about. Edgar Mitchell I could talk about this now because he's gone, but Edgar Mitchell talked about having encounters with non-human life forms. And this is out there. It's not widely discussed. Ken Arnold trained all the astronauts that went to the moon on the LEM and all that. He told me the astronauts would tell him privately what they saw. And they saw a lot of non-human stuff, a lot of extraterrestrial craft.
Code name Santa Claus.
Yeah, they called it a lot of things, but I was actually, Vance and I actually went to Ken's house a couple times, and he lived down in central Albuquerque, and he really cued us in on what was going on. Of course, it was mum. There was absolute silence among us. But I was shown SDS 48 and 72. They were war games in space. And I want to really make this clear. It was our stuff. Now, some of the stuff's on YouTube now, and it's debunked. It's real, folks. I saw it, what raw footage, not the conversion stuff that's available today. And this was our stuff. And how do you know it was our stuff? Because the cameras on the space shuttle, the craft would be busy with the crew doing experiments. And so they weren't looking, and they knew that, and they remote controlled the camera. Here comes one fleet of V-shaped craft. Here comes another. You see the firing lasers. There was a pulse beam that came up out of South America that was absolutely huge. It was a big war game. And I said this, I go, gee, nothing's getting hit. And Bill said, hey, stupid, it's a war game. And so we're watching this stuff. This was 1997 when I first saw this. And this is before the world saw it. And so what I'm telling you on this, Doug, is this stuff's been around for a long time. And we have stuff way beyond what people know. Let me show you a video that a colleague of mine, John Wayne, who does great work, and he's under the weather. Pray for him, folks. He's been seriously ill. But I want to play this video here. And I'll tell you, if this doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. Let me see if full screen will help here. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
I'm guessing this is the Arctic or Antarctica, but I want you to watch the background. Just be patient. This is only 1:42 long. Did you see this? Let me back up here.
Pyramids.
Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Nature doesn't work this way. These are 45-degree symmetrical angles. If there weren't snow caps on this, where would you think this would be?
Egypt.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not. I pulled up a replica of Egypt and I looked at where the 7 pyramids are. It doesn't match this configuration. So this is not Egypt. And look at the weather. Look at these are blizzard conditions. Now, hey, I want to play this again here. Doug, look at the helicopter. What can you tell me? I can't make this out. What do you, is this America?
It looks like a Swarovski, Russian-based troop
That was what
carrier,
I was, yeah.
based off the front hull of the aircraft, and obviously it has the landing skis on it as well.
Right there. So what's your guess? Arctic or Antarctic?
It could be either, honestly.
No one's been able to give me a good answer on this. Don't feel left out. I asked a climatologist today, showed him this. He was flipped out by it with the pyramids.
Well, I would tell
Go
you this
ahead.
much, that if you look at the South Pole and then you start to talk about stuff like Operation High Jump with Admiral Byrd, Rear Admiral Byrd, and there are accounts in his personal journal that came out years after he died, where he was talking about seeing different sorts of aircraft that were of Nazi origin that would be very similar to the flying disc, which is a God, I can't remember the nomenclature of it, but it is a certain model of aircraft that the Nazis were creating at that point in time. And there were also men who were brought over from Operation Paperclip that were Nazi scientists who said that the things that Rear Admiral Byrd was encountering was stuff that the Nazis were working on probably 10 years before he had encountered it, which would have been, in the late 40s and onward. And I find stuff that's interesting like this because even with Project Blue Book, with the U.S. OSI, the Office of Special Investigations, they considered the threat to be so serious in World War II that they created their own specialized investigation force just to investigate the Foo Fighters, which is what we were calling them.
Bingo.
And
And that's where the NSA and the CIA came from.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Mhm.
And it was such a, let me see, the UFOs then were such a problem that Allied aircraft and also Axis aircraft, include Japanese and Nazis,
Mhm.
all experienced the same thing. The same aircraft, they all had the exact same characteristics. And the Allies said, "Oh, we thought it was your craft," and then the Axis powers would say, "No, we thought it was yours." So no one knew who the aircraft was, who owned it, but it had capabilities that neither side had at that point in time. Though the Nazis were closest with their jet propulsion, though the Nazis were closest with the, I guess you could say, the structure of their aircraft, but still the capabilities were not there. So there are gaps of information that are missing. And you talked about the Philadelphia experiment. I believe that still has a lot to do with it because we're talking about the materializing of a escort a escort Navy ship that was used to escort a battleship that they were able to accidentally make disappear in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, while they were out there in the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And it either rematerialized or it didn't materialize back. I couldn't remember exactly what the story was. I know you know it better than I do. But I think that technology still has a lot to do with it. Someone was given that technology to make that oopsies.
Actually, I think it was Tesla that invented that. I don't think this came to the Germans.
Well, wasn't it Einstein as well working on that one?
No, well, no, not this was Tesla, strictly Tesla in the beginning. It's not that there wasn't collaboration later. In the lead up to the Philadelphia experiment, I couldn't ever determine if Tesla had collaborators. And they pretty well kept his name out of it. This is a really classified operation, but some of the survivors talked. And Art Bell, what a masterful interviewer this man was. He actually interviewed some of them. One of the guys was here in Phoenix, and he wouldn't give his name, and I'm not going to betray that either, but I was able to, through mutual friends of Art and myself, I was able to track him down and look him up, but he lived in the Phoenix area. And he talked to me very freely once I told him what my dad did. And he said, yeah, he said there were men that reappeared inside bulkheads. So in other words, he said the frequency to make a craft disappear like a metallic structure was different than the frequency you would use for a human being. So he said, if you're talking about like a transporter you'd see on Star Trek, he said the frequency would have to be different for biological as it differently than it would be material objects. And he said that they miscalculated this. This is why men rematerialized inside of bulkheads and died. And so the military had a hell of a job to cover this up. Let's watch the rest of this because it even gets better. I can't make out a language. I can hear voice, but look at this. This is the pyramid. You're up close, so you're seeing detail. This is the accumulated snow. This is how massive this is. I can't make out the patches either. I tried to make those out too. If anybody in the audience thinks they know more than what we know about this, please drop us a line. See, did you hear that at the end? I couldn't make the language out. Look at this. Does it get any more clear than this? Can you see that, Doug?
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that's probably the South Pole where this is going on at.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you, but I also agree with your assertion that you think it's Russian.
Well, the Russians have the largest military base that is in Antarctica. Now, there's a treaty amongst many different countries, and Germany kind of was a part of it at that point in time during about the 30s when all the countries agreed that they would more or less leave Antarctica alone and let it be an exploratory type of adventure. And you had many different countries who had claims to it. Obviously, Germany had New Schwabenland, but Russia still has the biggest footprint there. And it's mainly because Russia at that time and still to this day has the most advanced ice breaking ships that they would use to get to it. But the interesting thing about this is that Rear Admiral Byrd, I can't remember the name of the other colonel that flew with him, but on one of the exploratory flights, they left a ice shelf and flew about 300 miles away from it. Well, while they were traveling, they came across a series of freshwater lakes. And, you know, freshwater lakes that had a geothermal hit to it because none of the water was frozen. And the water, whenever they landed, measured at about 38 degrees. So, you know, not freezing, but still extremely cold. But the landmass around it was considered by Rear Admiral Byrd when they were doing the testing to be solid mountains of coal. They were blackish brown mountains. And he said that there was enough coal there in Antarctica to supply the world's coal needs for 200 to 300 years, which is why all these countries had such an invested time going into it. But
Mhm.
still, there
Yeah.
are things that you cannot explain. And if you go on Google Maps and you actually look through the satellite imagery and you try to completely scan Antarctica, there are going to be blotted out parts of Antarctica that you cannot see because they are digitally rendered to be blotted out. You'll also see different landing places in there where it looks like an aircraft hit and landed and jagged its way across the ice, and it's still visible. There are also places where you can see large openings of cavernous areas where you possibly could be able to fit an aircraft to come in and out of. Now, there are plenty of conspiracy theories out there, but the one thing that is real is that every so often, the world leaders will gather. They will gather in Antarctica
Yep.
with no press. No one's allowed to go there, but all the world leaders will agree not to try and kill each other for one day or a couple days, and they will go there and they will have this big conglomerate meeting. Now, Rear Admiral Byrd and some of his, conspiracy theorists will say that it is real documents, and then the fact checkers will say that it's all made up. But supposedly, Rear Admiral Byrd flew into a cavern that allowed him to go into a hollow earth. Now,
Mhm.
we can really go off on the deep end there, but supposedly the hollow earth connects the South Pole to the North Pole, and Rear Admiral Byrd was able to fly his aircraft for a very long time into this area. Now, I'm not going to go deeper into speculation with this because everything that I attempt at my best to research, I try to pull from physical, hard research from historians, from the military, from Rear Admiral Byrd, and things that are actually known. The rest I consider to be speculation, but still to be part of the evidence. Even if the evidence cannot be proved, it can still be logged as evidence. So we have to take him for his word that there is things in Antarctica that we could not explain, that the Nazis had capabilities that we still could not explain for that day for technology. And a lot of it is resembled in Russian aircraft, Chinese aircraft, and American aircraft. Now, obviously, the Chinese probably got some of that from Bill Clinton, but the TR-3Bs, the Flying Wings, the Phoenix Lights, there's too many similarities there. But once again, Dave, there's another physics problem here. Even this type of stuff that we can create that people would say, oh, hey, look in the sky, it's a flying V. There's a high probability that most of that is our technology, human technology.
I agree.
But there's a subtle difference, and I'm gonna let you go run wild with this. There's a subtle difference in nuts and bolts aircraft, and then aircraft like the Tic Tac aircraft that we cannot explain, and that comes from the propulsion capability, the pure physics around that don't make sense. And then there's another realm of, I wouldn't say aircraft, but unidentified objects that can shapeshift in mid-flight. I have seen the videos where it looks like a serpent flying through the sky. I've seen the videos where it looks like a mothership with smaller objects coming out, and that was over Brazil. And that was filmed by their military. Now, the biggest thing about this is, why is it coming out so much now, Dave, in the media?
Well, we're racing
Why does
towards
Tucker Carlson
disclosure.
carry it?
We're headed for disclosure on the terms of the globalists. We'll get their view so they can manipulate us. Let's play the rest of this. It's almost done. And then I'll tell you about downtown Phoenix. There's no denying what you're seeing here. Okay. And Doug, this is where I probably should stick in a little science. We have pyramids like this in the Wang province of China, in Cambodia, off the coast of Okinawa, and what they call Yamaguni. We believe there's something similar off the coast of Cuba. You've got Egypt. You've got South America, Central America. So here's the thing. You've got all these cultures, and the Egyptians were not seafaring. They were localized. You have all these pyramids appearing. And let me just go to Giza for a second in Egypt. There's water erosion on the Sphinx and the Big Plateau Pyramid, the Big Giza Pyramid. And it's been repaired 3 times, twice by the British and once by the Egyptians. And the last time, this is what climatologist says, not Dave Hodges, climatologist, the last time there was enough water in the Nile River Valley to get up that high on the Sphinx and the Nile and the pyramid was before the last ice age. We're told the pyramids are 4,000 to 5,000 years old. No, they're not. They're at least 10,600 years old. But here's what we know. When we take the sum total pyramids, and credit Richard Hoagland and his team for doing this, when you line up and use a computer program called Precession, and you go back in time on this computer program, all of the pyramids of this type line up to the constellation of Orion 17,500 years ago. This synchronicity. Now, you really want to get weird with this, folks? If you go to Cydonia on Mars, and see,
Yep.
we should have already been back to Cydonia. Cydonia has shadows like this, 45-degree angles, but it's not as clear. It's a cutaway view from space. But you can see the 45-degree angles, okay, the flat bases, and you can see something, the face on Mars looks like the Sphinx. And what we know, NASA says lights and shadows, bull crap. When you take these so-called lights and shadows, and Richard Hoagland did this at the Phoenix Convention Center, but it was in July of 97, 4 months after the Phoenix Lights, and he transposed Cydonia over Giza. It was a perfect match, 100% match. And when you use precession on Cydonia, 17,500 years ago, these pyramids went to the constellation Orion. Now, we don't have time to get into this tonight, but this is something, Doug, I'll talk to you about off air, and we may do a show on this, but it ties into something else. And I'm going to kind of, let's finish this, but I want to tell you about downtown Phoenix. Same as Giza, same as Egypt. By the way, we can't duplicate the pyramids today with our technology. We've tried. Okay, now you get some basis for relevance here. I sent this off to photographic experts today to try to get a read on this. How high is this? These men you assume are around 6 feet tall. How far away are they from the base? But this thing is freaking mammoth. Look at this. It's huge. It may be bigger than Giza. That was my initial reaction. And they're marching towards it. Okay, Doug, let me kind of close with this, and then I'll give you the mic for the last time. I'm going to shut this off here. Back in 1997, I was teaching a psychology class, and I had a young man, 19, 20, walk up to me. He was Native American, and he says, Professor, you're going to be really famous. Now, this is, I don't know, around the same time, 94, 95. No, I met Vance Davis in 93. So it was probably 93, 94. And he says, you're going to be famous. People are going to know you from the investigation work you're going to do. And I says, well, someday I may stop teaching and start just researching. He goes, no, I don't mean that. He goes, I mean stuff like from out there. And I go, what do you mean out there? He goes, from outer space. He was the grandson of a Hopi elder. The Hopi elders have told people like Steve Quayle and others that stargates exist. Now, just set that aside for reference. And he used to come and talk to me in my office a lot. So finally, it was time to bring Vance Davis, NSA, in on this. Vance, he walked away from NATO and the NSA because they were making him and his group do seances. They were trying to duplicate the Nazis back in the late 80s. And he says, I'm not doing this. They threw him in.
That's the SETI research.
Yeah, exactly. And they threw his butt and 6 compadres, including his present wife today, in prison. And then HW released them because these people knew too much. They couldn't put them on trial. So they had to lock him down with what they knew. And there's still things that Vance can't tell me. But anyway, long story short, with this kid, we'll call him Larry. Okay, I never divulged his real name because it links into the leadership of the Hopis. Now, what he told me, he called this group the Searcherin. And I'm still looking to validate this. Bill said he found it. Vance said he found it. They think it's a group of extraterrestrials. I said fallen angels, same difference. And there's advanced technology in places like Phoenix, deep underground. Now, this comes to a head in 1997. There is a Phoenix City Councilwoman named Frances Barwood. I've been a guest in her home. Her husband, Mike, her sons came in, met us, but Vance and I and Bill were all there, and we had dinner. Frances at that time was on the Phoenix City Council. She went public and said, all my constituents want to know what these lights were in the sky in March of 97. And then the governor made fun of her. He said, I'm going to disclose everything. And Symington came out with a fake alien suit, just made a total jackass of himself. Later, he apologized to Frances. And she said, I'm not saying these are aliens or anything, but here's what is really curious. The FBI gets the Phoenix City Council in executive session. And Frances shared this with us that night. She said they wanted us to donate the land in downtown Phoenix for a federal center. That federal center still lies almost empty today, nearly 30 years later. And you got a few cars in the parking lot and that's it. And so she was told, well, we got to do this because terrorists are here and this is advanced technology we're putting in to detect terrorists. Bullcrap. They were digging underground to access the technology that Larry told me about that was beneath the city of Phoenix. He said it was 20,000 years old. And he said, your people, meaning the government, cannot access this craft because it's biometric, like fingerprint, retina activation. He said, but it's so advanced. He said, your people can't figure it out. He said, the government talks to the Hopi elders often about this because they want them to divulge what they know. And he said, this secret's not going to your government. And so I had to keep that part under wraps for a long time because I didn't want this to come back on them. Frances told me the story about how the FBI finagled free land to get this. So I finally decide it's time to tell Bill Pollock and Vance Davis about this. And they about crapped their pants. Holy crap, you're talking to the grandson of the Hopi elder who's given you chapter and verse on secret technology? I said, yes. And they knew a lot more about this than I did. Vance said, come to my place. We drove downtown Phoenix and we walked down several streets, including by the Federal Center. He goes, they got that device there, that device there. And he said, and this is clearly an excavation site. I said, what do you mean? He goes, see the trucks over there? That's where they haul the dirt out at night, I guarantee you. And he said, they're looking for what this kid's telling you about. And I said, what do you know about it? He said, I was briefed on it in the 80s. And he said, they can't crack the technology. This is fascinating. Now, this kid told me stargates are real. Steve Quayle says stargates are real. I think it's a good starting point for a part 2. What do you think?
I think it is. And, here's an interesting correlation. We talked about the SETI organization, the SETI Institute, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. One of the key ways that these people will make contact with UFOs, with these aircraft, these entities, is by all sitting together in a big circle and they meditate. And as they meditate, they try to focus their minds on making one of these aircraft appear. And there's video documentation of them sitting around in a circle outside, out in somewhere in the wilderness, and they all start to hum or chant or whatever. And a light in the sky that was not there appears. And that, I guess they say, it's their version of communication. But how is it that someone terrestrial on Earth can sit down and meditate, and then a craft manifests itself, and then you sit here and try to tell me, the speculative person, that is a nuts and bolts aircraft? that's no different than what the Nazis were attempting to do, or did do, with their version of seances and occult rituals. I think there are obviously excavations going on, and we've heard the rumors of excavations going on for ancient technology. The Ahnenerbe, which was the Nazis' search and recovery, or search and recovery institute, was very deep into this, trying to find these mysterious powers and machines and aircraft and weaponry, and they were on the trail for that for a while.
Yes.
But the Americans really went the next level with it, but mainly because we took those same scientists and we applied later generation of technology and more funding, because there wasn't a war, so they could do more funding. But it's really what the researchers find, I think, in history that backs us up, all the way up to like multiple 1,000-year-old cave drawings of aircraft, of entities that look like the Greys, of all different types of stuff. And throughout America and throughout South America, you will find, from the Incan, the Mayan, the Aztec, and the North American Native American tribes, they all have very similar tales of aircraft, of entities, of interdimensional time travelers through some sort of a portal. They all have a very similar story. That story cannot be so similar, from the Incans in Peru to the Hopi elders to the Serpent Mound up north in Ohio, and not have some validity of truth. And within every lie, Dave, as you always say, there are elements of truth.
That's true.
The lie, I believe, that eventually is coming is the great lie, the great deceiving. And why is it also, Dave, and I'll let you finish with this, why is it also that even the American government has something called what was the project where they would then Bluebeam, Operation Bluebeam.
We'll talk about that next time, I think.
Yeah, that's a interesting topic within itself.
Let me bring up share screen here for a second. I just want to show you one thing. You're talking about the people meditating to bring UFOs in. You're talking about Stephen Greer.
Yeah.
And look at this here. Secret branch of the military being formed, and it's not of this earth. This used to be an interview with Bill Pollock, my late friend, and Stephen Greer. And Bill had been to S4. A true story. And Stephen interviewed him for about an hour on here. This used to be on my website forever and a day. The government took it down, took it away from me.
And Steve Greer was part of multiple presidents' administrations with the SETI research. He's gone to multiple different presidents for funding, and has received funding, I believe, from the government for his institute for this research. And I'll give you another one. The Vatican is very, very interested in UFOs.
Oh, listen, Steve Quayle, and I believe him, Mount Graham, there's supposedly a Stargate there under the control of the Vatican.
Well, the Vatican's telescope, the Lucifer telescope.
Mount Graham, yep.
Yep. One of the cardinals that is there, that's in charge of that research, told Steve and Tom Horn and Timothy Alberino that before they can start to look out for things coming towards Earth, which is what they're looking for, they're looking for extraterrestrial life coming from outer space to Earth within our solar system. And they said that they have to wait for the UFOs within Earth's atmosphere to clear for them to see further into space. What do you make of that?
It doesn't make any sense to me. We can penetrate the atmosphere now with lasers, so we have the technology optically to penetrate the atmosphere too. I don't think that's accurate.
Yeah, well, and once again, this is the realms of speculation. Can you really trust the Vatican? But this is also this is also the same Vatican with a pope who said, if aliens come to Earth, I will baptize them because they deserve to go to heaven like everyone else.
Well, they're demons. My book, Genesis 6, The Fallen Angels, it's my book. They're demons, and this is part of the Great Deception. And that's something we can develop in the next thing. Steve and I've done shows on this, Steve Quayle and I. I probably should get Timothy Alberino back on my show. We had him on the radio and he was terrific. What a great guest. And we should probably get him on and talk about this. I'll leave you with this one thought. I should never have stayed at RBN. No disrespect to John Statmiller, who's recently passed, but for a lot of reasons. And when I left, my audience took off when I went independent. So I had Annie DeRiso, who was Bill's wife, Bill Pollock's wife. Annie used to be big in the UFO movement. She still hosts UFO conferences when they had them before the pandemic. And Annie was my news director for 6.5 years on the Common Sense Show. And she said, how would you like to talk to Werner von Braun's former secretary? Are you kidding? Of course I would. So we talked over the phone twice. She, charming, witty, very friendly. But as a matter of fact, she told me the following story. She said, I'm sitting in the office with Werner, and she said, all of a sudden, 2 aliens appeared in the office and they were giving him directions on technology and they handed him some papers. She was serious and as sober as a judge. So I'm saying, can you tell me more about this? She goes, I'll tell you on your show. Statmiller wouldn't let me have her on. So that's 2 lunatic fringe. Werner von Braun's secretary is lunatic fringe. But anyway, I did find out what that was all about at a later time, though. And I don't know if she's still alive. This would have been 2010, maybe 2011 when this happened. But so I've got to have some pretty good encounters. The most stunning, though, Doug, is this. When you listen to Edgar Mitchell talk, he would talk about telepathic powers, connecting with the spirit of the universe, meaning God and Jesus. And he was talking about a different form of communication. And this is known to be accurate among both angels and the fallen angels. And Edgar would talk about this openly. In our meetings, he'd get real specific about what he saw. In fact, they were told, some of the astronauts were told, don't ever come back here again. So that's why Apollo 17 was the last flight.
Well, Edgar Mitchell also talked about monoliths that were on the moon and that were on Mars.
Yeah, all the astronauts talked about that. Yes, that's
especially
true. Most of them. Yeah.
Yeah, the moon of Mars, Phobos. It also had a monolith that he would go into great detail over.
Well, they were flying around the moon, and the LEM almost ran into a monolithic structure. They had to bleep it out. It was like, oh, blank. Did you see that? And pretty interesting. So they had to substitute fake footage, which gave fuel to the conspiracy crowd that we never went to the moon, because there's some anomalies in there you can't explain. But it's not that they didn't go to the moon. They were covering up what they saw on the moon, and they had to put fake footage in there.
Yeah, the astronauts actually had a code name for the aircraft that they were being visited by quite often. And their code name for it was Santa Claus. Every time there would be a unknown aircraft flying by that was not them, that was their code name, was Santa Claus. Oh, look, there's Santa Claus again over to our left or to our right. Yeah, there's too many things there that we can't verify because a lot of these people who saw it are dead and won't be able to verify because the government won't let you know.
I want to give a plug to our friend on the trail, the Nephilim. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, LA?
Yeah, LA Marzulli. By the way,
yeah.
I'm doing a conference with him at Hear the Watchman in March. And it's a great series on YouTube, folks. It always comes up on my suggested videos. And he does a fantastic job he's a frequent guest on the show. I've had him on 4 or 5 times.
Really?
Great man, great researcher. So's Tim Alberino too. And Steve, they're all tremendous. Folks, there's things seen and unseen in our world. And our show tonight has covered this. We've probably raised more questions than we've provided answers. That's because we don't have a lot of answers. But what we can show you is the world is not as we're told it is. We're living in a great deception right now, but the great deception and revelations is yet to come. And my money's on Project Bluebeam. but we'll have to see. Hey, Doug, this was fun stuff. This is a little off the beaten path for the Doug and Dave Intel report, but I'd say there's pretty interesting intel here.
Yeah, there's a really good TV series that people should check out on the History Channel called Skinwalker Ranch, and it's led by one of NASA's leading physicists and rocket engineers. And they actually uncover quite a few different things that the public hasn't seen, and for whatever reason, it was released for public knowledge. So check that out, Skinwalker Ranch on History Channel. That
Well,
will
Steve had this covered on one of his Branson conferences in detail.
Oh yeah,
In
oh yes,
detail.
yep.
And yeah, it's too bad we don't do the in-person Branson anymore because of the lockdowns, but those are some great conferences. Hey, Doug, it's late here. It's kind of cool to tell ghost stories, so to speak, at the witching hour, but I got my bed awaiting me because I got an early morning rise. But I want to thank you for coming on. This was fun, a little off the beaten path for us, but I think it fits into where the globalists are taking the planet.
I agree completely.
Okay, my friend, I'll talk to you next time. This is Dave for the Doug and Dave Intel Report. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next time.
Thanks, everybody.